Hey guys, what's up? It's Fern. Thank you so much for joining me for another PLANTY video. Today we're going to be talking all about moss poles, my journey with moss poles, mistakes that I've made, what I've learned over the years, that kind of vibe, as well as my favorite products and just like my favorite way to grow my climbing plants now. I feel like I've made a lot of mistakes. I've learned through trial and error. I made my first moss pole in 2020 and I would never make one like that now. So I'm gonna kind of go through what didn't work for me and I guess what works for me now, and also my routine, how I care for them, all that stuff. I just wanted to make a video where I just compile everything moss pole and climbing plant related. So hopefully this is going to be a good resource for you to reference back to. I'm going to do timestamps and everything. So yeah, we're just going to hop into it. And also let me know if you have any questions down below and I will get back to you down in the comments as well. So my journey with moss poles started in 2020. At least I'm pretty sure this is when I made my very first moss pole, at least my first documented one, because I can go back on my channel and find that video, which is hilarious to watch now because like I said, I made some mistakes, okay? And actually, I should make a disclaimer because I know people are gonna, you should do this, you should do that. This is not a how-to video. This is a how I do this video. So I'm not saying that this is the best way. I'm just sharing with you what has worked for me and what I've learned, and you can take what serves you and you can leave what doesn't. But yeah, plants are so difficult to give like a one-size-fits-all answer or like method for anything. You really just have to take things and adapt them to your environment and your plants and your style of plant care and whatever works for you. So yeah, that being said, 2020, my first moss pole, which was for Monstera adansonii. The first mistake that I made, I should say, is using the wrong supplies. So I used to use a plastic hardware mesh, which was like, it was a fairly sturdy, I guess, like as far as plastic goes. It was a fairly thick plastic, but it was malleable enough that it was pretty easy to make a moss pole out of it. It looked very similar to the wire mesh that I use now. Like it just looked like this kind of grid situation, except for it was a plastic, which worked well, honestly, for a lot of small plants. But the problem started when the plants would grow and become heavy, or I would try to extend those poles. They just could not handle any weight or any, like, if it was too tall, they became very flimsy. They would lean over, they would like completely bend. They would just, yeah, it was not a good situation with those poles. Also combined with the fact that I was making them way too thin, it was just not a good situation. I mean, it worked, some of them worked, but for the most part, they were not sturdy and they would not hold moisture well because I was not using the right product and I was making them way too thin. Another kind of product mistake that I was using was not using a high quality sphagnum moss. I remember I ordered this just like really cheapy sphagnum moss off of Amazon, which I understand. And I'm not saying all the cheap sphagnum mosses off of Amazon are not good, but this particular one that I had was so bad. It smelled awful. And I know sphagnum moss is expensive. I hate buying it as well, but it really does pay off and make such a big difference to have a high quality sphagnum moss. But yeah, the one that I was using, I remember it stunk up my whole house. It smelled so bad. So whenever people comment and tell me that their sphagnum moss smells bad, I'm just like, try a different one because not all of them smell bad. Like I cannot smell my moss poles at all in here. If you have a nice high quality sphagnum moss, it should honestly be like fresh smelling. After experiencing a bad sphagnum moss, I realized how important it is to find a good quality one and also to find a brand that has more sustainable practices. So I like using the New Zealand, or the, what's it called? Best Grow New Zealand sphagnum moss. That's a really good one. Other ones that I like are the 1 Mile sphagnum moss from Crystal Star Nursery, and I've also ordered the sphagnum moss from Raven Vision Orchids. I'll link all the products I mentioned in the description box, but yeah, I do have a few specific brands of sphagnum moss that I really like that I will stick to just because I know that they are good quality and there's nothing like weird or funky about it. Also, since it is so expensive and I want to be mindful of being as sustainable as possible, I will reuse all of my sphagnum moss. If I take apart a pole, if a plant is being propagated in sphagnum and then I move it out of that, I'm always going to reuse it. I used to boil sphagnum moss, which you can do, and especially you might want to do that if you have pez or something like that. But I don't tend to boil my moss anymore just because it really loses its integrity. It's not going to be as nice and fluffy if you boil it. So lately I've been just putting my moss into a strainer and then just setting it in the sun and kind of letting it dry out like that. Obviously probably not the best idea if you have pests, so be mindful of that. But yeah, I've just been kind of letting it dry out and then reusing it, and that doesn't make it all weird and mushy. But yeah, I've just been kind of letting it dry out and then reusing it like that, and that's been working fine. Oh yes, okay, so another mistake that I made, specifically in this first moss pole video that I was looking back on, I was putting mature vines on a pole. Like I was just like wrapping a big like Adansonii vine around the pole. And although the newer nodes near the top may root in and start to grow from there, it's much more beneficial to just start your plant off from cutting so that it can have the benefit of the pole from a juvenile stage. It'll be able to root in right away, and then the leaves are just gonna get more mature from there. So I will always, it might look a little ridiculous, but I will always start, like I put just like these tiny cuttings on this big pole, because eventually it's going to grow up the pole and the leaves are going to get nice and big for us. So as young as possible, like I plant up just little tiny baby cuttings onto these poles and they will eventually grow into it. You can wait until your plant is a little bit bigger, but I think it just makes the most sense to just utilize it from when it's as young as possible. Also, another mistake that I used to make, and I did this for years, you guys, like in fact, it's only been within the past probably year or so that I've been better with this, but it was having moss poles but not keeping them moist. I would always fall behind on my moss pole maintenance, and the roots inside the poles would end up dying, and at that point they're just kind of like, there's no point to having a plant on a moss pole. You might as well just do something like a stake, which I am. Near the end of this video, I'm going to talk about some low maintenance options for climbing plants. So if that's more your jam, then stay tuned for that later in the video. But yeah, I would just let my poles get so bone dry. It was awful. And like I said, they're not really serving a purpose other than supporting your plant at that point. So yeah, that was just very silly, because I couldn't even when I chopped the plant, I couldn't use the roots that were grown into the pole because they were all just dried off. So you really do have to keep them consistently moist to keep those roots alive and healthy inside the pole. They can tolerate drying out for a short period of time, but you can't leave them for like bone dry for, you know, days and days and weeks. They're not gonna survive. I'm so much better now. It's crazy to me that I've actually been able to do chop and extends with my plants where I can actually utilize the nice healthy roots inside the pole because I've kept up with keeping them moist and the roots are alive and healthy. And yeah, it's just amazing. So when you do commit to maintaining a moss pole and keeping them moist and healthy, then the payoff is huge. I've been so much better with caring for my moss poles, and that's because A, I found products that work better for me, and B, I've just been more strict with my routine, and I've found ways to just kind of minimize the amount of time it takes to maintain them and care for them. So I said that the plastic mesh didn't work well for me. What I have found that works amazing for me are the plastic closed back poles that look like this. Now there are a lot of brands that are making these now. So there's a lot of different options out there. I use the Rousseau ones. I like the size of them the best. I find them to be very sturdy, very easy to work with, and I like that they have a front closure option, so it's easy to remove the plant and to propagate it, cut it, stuff like that. So yeah, these poles, ever since I tried them, they pretty quickly became my favorite. They keep the moss moist for longer than anything else that I've tried, which is a huge plus for me because obviously I've struggled with keeping the moss moist enough in the past. And yeah, I've just had really great luck with my plants enjoying them and climbing them. And then I'm also trying out, like you can see here, the wire mesh, which I'm mostly doing this just out of curiosity because I see a lot of other people have success with using the wire. And I was just curious, you know, I wanted to be part of the wire DIY moss pole club as well. So I made 3. I currently have 4 in total of these poles. and they are a lot more work to make. Like, these are a pain in the butt to make, in my opinion, and they're a lot more work to keep moist because they dry out way quicker. This dries out probably 3 times faster than the closed back poles, like my Rousseau pole right here, which is pretty significant. So you have to be watering this a lot more often. But I think that the pro that kind of intrigues me about these is that you have more surface area to work with, which obviously is a pro and a con. The con is that it loses moisture way quicker because you have 360 degrees to work with here. But the pro is that you can have plants growing on any side of this that you want. So if you want a climbing plant that's more bushy, like I'm thinking of, you know, climbing heartleaf philodendrons, stuff like that, I think that that would be stunning on this kind of pole. Or I recently put philodendron burl marks variegated on one of these poles because I just wanted it to be more bushy and I wanted to see what it would look like having more surface area of the plant covered in vines and leaves, if that makes any sense. So it really just depends on your preferences, but this one really is like the plug and play option of moss poles. One of the big benefits of using moss poles, either type, is that you can extend them once your plant climbs to the top. So you can create an even taller, like if you just want the pole to get taller, like up into a certain point, you can just keep adding extensions on. Or if you want to maintain the height or have your plant become shorter again, you can chop it, say like in the middle of the pole, and you can just repot up the top portion because this is going to have roots inside here. So it's still going to have roots and it's still going to be able to grow out. So you can repot the top portion and then add an extension onto there and it's going to keep growing up. That might sound complicated if you haven't seen it done before. There's tons of videos on YouTube that show this. I'll link some videos in the description box of me chopping and extending my plants. I did one recently with my Cebu Blue and with my Escaleto, I believe, as well. So it is a really cool thing about moss poles, and part of what makes growing plants on them so rewarding, because you can just keep increasing the maturity of your plant. Because if you just take cuttings and root them, your plant's going to revert to being more juvenile, at least for a while. But this way, with just being able to extend it, you can just have continuous growth and hopefully see that plant just keep sizing up even more. And you can also just, it allows you to have more control over the height of the plant, the size of the plant, to fit your space. I have pretty tall ceilings here, so I can grow mine to be pretty tall, like 6-7 feet, even higher if I wanted to, but they do become unmanageable at a certain point and a pain in the butt to move around and stuff. So I typically try to keep them at, I would say, 6 feet or under. Okay, I'm gonna talk about my care routine for these plants in a second, but I first just wanted to mention some of the low maintenance options for climbing plants if you're not into moss poles, which also some people just don't even like the look of moss poles, which those people probably aren't watching this video, but I understand that as well. So a nice kind of minimal, low profile looking option is a bamboo stake. I love the look of a bamboo stake. I find it looks very clean, very nice. I have one for my philodendron tortum just because I felt like a moss pole would look a little aggressive with the dainty leaves of the philodendron tortum. So I love having it on a bamboo stake. I need to switch it out for a taller one soon. But it honestly works great to support that plant. And I think a lot of philodendron, like I've seen philodendron splendid grown just on a stake and they can get quite large. I think a lot of them are going to be really happy just on a stake. So if you want to have nice climbing plants, but you don't want to bother with moss poles, I think that would be a great route to go as well. And I'm sure that you're going to be able to grow a beautiful plant on a bamboo stake. Another option, which might not be for everybody, but I think is kind of fun, is the wooden plank. This is a really big thing in like 2021, I think. Everyone was kind of doing these plants on planks. And I like the look of it. Like, I really do. I like that kind of just like, I don't even know what the vibe would be, like a rustic, just having like a wooden plank chilling among your plants. I think it gives a cool kind of like, no, what's the word I'm looking for? Industrial kind of look. Yeah, I really dig that. So I do have a wooden plank. Nothing's on it right now because I just cut up my Monstera dubia, but you can do not only shingling plants like that, but you can also do climbing plants on there. I think that Jeff from Everything Plants has some really wonderful examples of that. He grows some of his plants on wooden planks and they're getting pretty massive. So yeah, it's another option to be able to support your plant. It will actually root onto the plank as well. So it's pretty neat. I think that that's a really unique way to grow climbing plants. And honestly, I would like to try out another plank or two in my home because yeah, I do think that it is just a really cool vibe. And let's not forget that there are no rules when it comes to growing plants or styling plants. One of my favorite climbers in my collection is actually just growing wild, not climbing at all, and that's my philodendron Florida Ghost. It lives on top of the cupboard above my fridge and is just kind of like coming down, growing all crazy, looking all wonky. I love it. It has so much personality, and I've had people comment before, they're like, that's a climber, like you should put it on a pole or you should give it a stake, blah blah blah. And I know that it's a climber, but like I said, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want. And I just think that it's so fun to have it growing like that. So I stuck it up there temporarily when I moved in, but then I was like, you know what? I kind of dig this. So yeah, you can just experiment. You can try different things. You can do whatever you want. So yeah, I love when people find different and unique ways to grow plants. Like that's honestly one of my favorite things about the hobby. So if you have any like interesting ways that you grow climbers or that you grow any plants, I guess, leave them in the comments because I would love to read. I always wish that we could leave photos in the comments, but I understand why that's not allowed because I'm sure that that would just not be good. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything else that I wanted to mention, but I don't think so. I was just gonna tell y'all how my little routine for caring for my moss poles. So I always get asked how I keep my moss poles moist, and the only answer is just consistency. Like you really have to be on top of it. It is a commitment. I don't think it's a big time commitment, but it is just like a little chore that you have to stay consistent with because once they dry out too much, that's when they really become unmanageable. So what I do is usually every second day, I go around with my little squeeze bottle. One of these guys right here, honestly, one of the most underrated and handy plant tools. I use these all the time. So I go around with my little squeeze bottle and I just top up my moss poles. You want them to be moist, not like sopping wet, but you want them to be lightly moist. And if they dry out too much, they're gonna be hydrophobic. So all the water is just gonna bead off. It's gonna make a mess. It's not gonna absorb. In that case, you have to really be patient with it and water it really slowly until it starts like actually uptaking and absorbing the water again. But in an ideal situation, you want your pole to just be lightly moist at all times, which is why I do it every second day, because at that point they're not dried out yet, but they could use some more water. So I just go around, add a small amount of water, and doing it this way, I've never had any overwatering issues. Sometimes I get comments about people being concerned that all the water is going to come down into the pot. But when you're just adding a little bit every second day or you could even do probably every third day. I mean, of course it depends where you live. If you live somewhere really dry and hot, or if you live somewhere that's, you know, where I am, that's kind of gloomier a lot of the year, it's really gonna change what your routine's gonna be. But I find every second day just to be like the easiest for me to keep up with. But if you're doing it that way, I don't think you're gonna be at high risk of overwatering. Every once in a while, I do like to throw these just right in the shower and water them that way. Then I can make sure the pole is really drenched and also make sure the pot is like fully saturated and getting like a thorough watering as well. You just have to make sure that you let them drain enough. Like I'll let them sit in the tub for probably around an hour, because if you go and you put this back in its cover pot, if you're using a cover pot, or even in the tray, then all the water is still gonna be like, this pole is still gonna be sopping wet if you move it out right away, and that's all gonna come down. And this has happened to me. So learn from my mistakes. This happened to me multiple times where all the water comes down into the tray or into the pot and I don't notice it until like the next time I go to water or something, and I'm like, oh shoot, this thing is overwatered. Usually the plant's fine, but yeah, it's not something that you necessarily want to make a habit out of. I also do like to use fertilizer water to water my poles, because there are like, the whole point of poles is to have healthy roots living in here, and they're going to help the plants grow bigger and stronger because they're taking up more water, and they can take up more nutrients for the plant as well, which is going to contribute to its overall growth and well-being. So I like to use fertilizer water on my poles, not every time, but maybe like, I don't know, every second time that I water them, or every third time that I water them. Or sometimes I use Super Thrive, just kind of whatever I'm feeling, but I do like to get some nutrients into the pole as well. Trying to think of what else. I guess the other thing that I would say is that it is going to be hugely beneficial to stay on top of your extensions. which I have not always been great about. Sometimes my plants will grow over. I feel like I'm better now than I used to be, for sure. But obviously it's detrimental because your plant, the new nodes aren't gonna have any moss to root into. So you wanna make sure you have an extension there so it can just continue growing and it's not experiencing an interruption. Again, the closed back poles are super, super easy to extend. So that's probably part of the reason that I'm a lot better with it now, because it's just less work to do. I do have a whole moss pole playlist where I go into things in a lot more depth. So I'll link that down below. As well, I'll like choose which videos I think have good information and are the most relevant, and I'll link those specific videos, but I will also link my moss pole playlist if you're curious to kind of browse through that and see like some of these things and some of these mistakes I've made throughout the years. Okay, I think that is it. Again, let me know if you have any questions. You can leave them down below in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you found a little tidbit of useful information in here or just enjoyed it nonetheless. I really, really appreciate you guys. I hope that your plants are thriving, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.